Hello, everybody. This is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Part 2, Chapter 25. The racecourse was a great ellipse of 4 versts, extending before the judges' stand, and 9 obstacles were placed upon it. A reka, barrier, 2 arshins high in front of the pavilion, a dry ditch, a ditch filled with water, a steep ascent, an Irish banquet, which was the most difficult of all, composed of an embankment covered with twigs, behind which is concealed a ditch, obliging the horseman to leap 2 obstacles at once at the risk of his life. Then 3 more ditches, 2 filled with water, and finally the goal opposite the pavilion again. The track did not begin in the circle itself, but about 100 sajens to one side, and in this space was the first obstacle, the brimming reka, and 3 arshins in width, which they were free to leap or to ford. 3 times the 17 riders got into line, but each time some horse or other started before the signal, and the men had to be called back. Colonel Sestrin, the starter, was beginning to get impatient, but at last, for the 4th time, the signal was given, "Go!" and the riders spurred their horses. All eyes, all lorgnettes, were directed towards the racers. "There they go, there they come," was shouted on all sides, and in order to follow them the spectators rushed, singly or in groups, towards the places where they should get a better view. At the first moment the horsemen scattered a little, as they, in 3s and 2s and singly, one after the other, approached the reka. From a distance they seemed like an undistinguishable mass, but these fractions of separation had their own value. Frou-Frou, excited and too nervous at first, lost ground, and several of the horses were ahead of her. But Vronsky, though he had not yet leaped the reka, was trying to calm her, and she pulled on the bridle. Soon easily outstripped the 3 who had won on him, and now had as competitors only Gladiator, who was a whole length ahead, and the pretty Diana, on whose back clung the unhappy Prince Kozoflev, not knowing whether he was dead or alive. During these few seconds Vronsky had no more control of himself than of his horse. Gladiator and Diana leapt the reka at almost one and the same moment. Frou-Frou lightly leapt behind them, as though she had wings. The instant that Vronsky was in the air, he caught a glimpse of Kozoflev almost under the feet of his horse, wrestling with Diana on the other side of the reka. Vronsky heard after the race how Kozoflev had loosened the reins after Diana jumped, and the horse had stumbled, throwing him on his head. But at this time he only saw that Frou-Frou was going to land on Diana's head, but Frou-Frou, like a falling cat, making a desperate effort with back and legs as she leapt, landed beyond the fallen racer. "Oh, my beauty," thought Vronsky. After the reka he regained full control of his horse, and even held her back a little, meaning to leap the great hurdle behind Makotin, whom he had no hopes of outstripping before they reached the long stretch of about 200 sajens, which was free of obstacles. This great hurdle was built exactly in front of the imperial pavilion. The emperor, the court, and an immense throng were watching as they drew near it. Vronsky felt all these eyes fixed on him from every side, but he saw only his horse's ears and ground flying beneath him, and Gladiator's flanks and white feet beating the ground in cadence and always maintaining the same distance between them. Gladiator flew at the hurdle, gave a whisk of his well-cropped tail, and without having touched the hurdle, vanished from Vronsky's eyes. "Bravo!" cried a voice. At the same instant the planks of the hurdle flashed before his eyes. His horse leapt without breaking, but he heard behind him a loud crash. Frou-Frou, excited by the sight of Gladiator, had leapt too soon, and had struck the hurdle with the shoes on her hind feet. Her gait was unchanged. And Vronsky, his face splashed with mud, saw that the distance had not increased or diminished as he caught a glimpse again of Gladiator's crupper, his short tail, and his swift white feet. Frou-Frou seemed to have the same thought as her master, for while not showing excitement, she sensibly increased her speed, and gained on Makotin, trying to take the inside track. But Makotin did not yet yield this advantage. Vronsky was wondering if they could not pass on the further side of the slope, when Frou-Frou, as though divining his thought, changed of her own accord and took his direction. Her shoulder, darkened with sweat, closed with Gladiator's flanks, and for several seconds they flew almost side by side. But in order not to take the outside of the great circle, Vronsky urged Frou-Frou on just as they passed the divide, and on the descent he managed to get the lead. As he drew by McCaughton, he saw his mud-stained face, and it seemed to him that he smiled. And though he was behind, he was still there, within a step, and Vronsky could hear the regular rhythm of his stallion's feet and the hurried but far from winded breathing. The next two obstacles, the ditch and the hurdle, were easily passed, but Gladiator's gallop and puffing came nearer. Vronsky gave Frou-Frou the spur, and perceived with a thrill of joy that she was easily accelerated her speed. The sound of Gladiator's hoofs grew fainter. He now had the lead as he had desired, and as Cord had recommended, and he felt sure of success. His emotion, his joy, his affection for Frou-Frou were all on the increase. He wanted to look back, but he did not dare to turn around, and he did his best to calm himself so as not to excite his horse. A single serious obstacle now remained to be passed, the Irish banquet, and if cleared, if he kept his head level, would give him the victory without the slightest doubt. He and Frou-Frou at the same instant caught sight of the obstacle from afar, and both horse and man felt a moment of hesitation. Vronsky noticed the hesitation in his horse's ears, and he was just lifting his whip when it occurred to him, just in time, that she knew what she had to do. The beautiful creature got her start, and, as he foresaw, seeming to take advantage of the impetus, rose from the ground, and cleared the ditch with energy that took her far beyond, then fell again into the measure of her pace without effort and without change. "Bravo, Vronsky!" cried the throng. He recognized his friends and his regiment who were standing near the obstacle, and he distinguished Yashvin's voice, though he did not see him. "Oh, my beauty!" said he to himself, thinking of Frou-Frou, and yet listening to what he was going on behind him. "He's cleared it," he said, as he heard Gladiator's gallop behind him. The last ditch, full of water, 2 arshins wide, was now left. Vronsky scarcely heeded it, but anxious to come in far ahead of the others, he began to saw on the reins and to urge on the horse by falling into her motion and leaning far over her head. He felt that she was beginning to be exhausted. Her neck and her sides were wet, the sweat stood in drops on her throat, her head and her ears, her breath was short and gasping. Still, he was sure that she had force enough to cover the 200 sajans that lay between him and the goal. Only because he felt himself so near to the end, and by the extraordinary smoothness of her motion, did Vronsky realize how much she had increased her speed. The ditch was cleared. How, he did not know. She cleared it like a bird. But at this moment Vronsky felt to his horror that, instead of taking the swing of his horse, he had made, through some inexplicable reason, a wretchedly and unpardonably wrong motion in falling back into the saddle. His position suddenly changed, and he felt something horrible had happened. He could not give himself any clear idea of it, but there flashed by him a roan steed with white feet, and McCaughton was the winner. One of Vronsky's feet touched the ground, and his horse stumbled. He had scarcely time to clear himself when the horse fell on her side, panting painfully and making vain efforts with the delicate foam-colored neck to rise again. But she lay on the ground and struggled like a wounded bird. By the movement that he had made in the saddle, he had broken her back. But he did not learn his fault till afterwards. Now he saw only one thing, that Gladiator was far ahead, and that he was there alone, standing on the wet ground before his defeated Frou-Frou, who stretched her head towards him and looked at him with her beautiful eyes. Still not realizing the trouble, he pulled down the reins. The poor animal struggled like a fish and tried to get up on her forelegs, but unable to move her hindquarters, she fell back on the ground all of a tremble. Vronsky, his face pale and distorted with rage, kicked her in the belly to force her to rise. She didn't move, but gazed at her master with one of her sparkling looks and buried her nose in the sand. Ah, what have I done? Cried Vronsky, taking her head in his hands. Oh, what have I done? In the lost race, and his humiliating, unpardonable blunder, and the poor ruined horse. Ah, what have I done? The surgeon, his assistant, his comrades, everyone ran to his aid. But to his great mortification, he found that he was safe and sound. The horse's back was broken. She had to be killed. Incapable of uttering a word, Vronsky answered nothing to all the questions which were put to him. He left the race course without picking up his cap or knowing whither he was going. He was in despair. For the first time in his life, he was the victim of a misfortune for which there was no remedy, and for which he felt that he himself was the only one to blame. Yashvin hastened after him with his cap and took him back to his quarters. At the end of half an hour he was calm and self-possessed again, but this race was for a long time the most bitter and cruel remembrance of his life.